Each season, summer, fall, and winter, spring, the Loft schedules a huge variety of classes, both for adults and for youth. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce a teaching artist who instructs both, Rachel Moulton. Rachel, could you introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved at the Loft?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Rachel Eve Moulton, and I am a fiction writer. I have a wonderful friend who's been teaching at the Loft, named Mary Carol Moore, and she's talked about it in the past. And I reached out to her and I was like, I'm really looking for some places to teach. I was a full-time teacher and I'm not doing full-time right now, but I really miss working with writers and working with teenagers. And she recommended the Loft highly, and I'm thrilled to be working with you guys.
So, as I mentioned, and as you sort of touched on, you teach for these two pretty different audiences. How do you approach those classes differently and in some cases similarly?
Well, I think that when you teach, you're learning a lot from your students as you go. So I don't know that I necessarily approach them differently. I've taught a lot of different age groups, from graduate students um, to actually the youngest is 8th grade. And I do think there's a different kind of topic you might cover, but you're also just working to inspire people to write, to believe in themselves, to find their own voice, to investigate literature. And so while you might shape questions slightly differently for different age groups, or maybe introduce different kinds of material, you still follow the lead of the class, right? You're still trying to figure out who you've got in the room, what's going to benefit them most, what's going to make them the most able to talk and therefore express what they need to learn from the class. So I think reading the room, listening to the voices that are there, and in some ways being open to letting that group of people teach you in their own way is really important, and that applies to any age group.
And you use the word inspire, which I think is pretty critical in teaching for any age, any subject. What does inspire you for the classes that you propose?
Well, one of them we're going to be writing about. I've had this love of horror writing my whole life, and kind of was a little, I will say, just critical of to be critical of myself right now, a little snobby about it. I was like, wow, I want to be a literary writer. And so kind of was watching movies and reading books and writing these kind of horrific little things and working in that way, and realizing as I got to publishing finally, um, that I'd been working in that genre as well, and that there was nothing wrong with that, right? Which was kind of funny because I told students all along and believed it. There's nothing wrong with writing in a genre. You got to do what you want to do. You got to tell the right story, find the right voice. But when it applied to me, it was a little harder. So I think finding that inspiration and what makes a student want to write is really important. And I kind of had my own path in that way. And so we're going to teach a horror class, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means, and that it doesn't just mean one thing, and how you want to use that genre. And it could be, it's a huge genre. So it could be, if you want to write a slasher film or book, that's fine. Those are pretty fun. Or if you want to write something more serious that has some really intense themes in it, that also applies. And that is very literary. So there's a wide range of things I think you can get out of that. The youth course is really about some things I've already said a couple times about finding your voice, right? Feeling powerful, feeling like you have something to say, feeling like your vision of the world you live in, or the world your characters live in, is valid and has relevance, and really figuring out what that is. And, some young people feel very isolated in their own worlds, and that unique voice finds a lot of strength on the page and gives them strength. And sometimes you might think that you don't have anything to say, right? As a young person, my life is normal, it's boring, every story's been told, and figuring out that that's not true. And even if you're telling the exact same story you've read somewhere else, it's your voice, it's your energy, it's the way you look at the objects and the people that occupy that world that's going to make it totally different. So we're really helping people at every age, but in that young adult class, figure out what it is they have to say and how they want to say it.
One of the factors that overlays both of these classes is this idea of not being sure that what you want to write or what you're interested in writing is really considered valid, right?
Yeah.
Especially in a more literary sense. And so when you have students in your class who seem really passionate about something, but are also seem like they're hesitating, right? Maybe like your own example is maybe they do want to write a slasher, but they don't feel like it's literary enough, that it's smart enough.
Yep. Yep.
What advice do you give those students?
You got to write it anyway. You just got to dig into it and have fun with it. And if you are going to pursue writing, there's going to be things you keep and things you ditch. And so why not dig in and see if this is a keeper, and tell the story, and try not to take yourself too seriously as you're doing these things, to really dive in, because you might surprise yourself. And when you share your work, whether it's something that's published and strangers can look at it, or if it's something you share with friends or people just within the class, getting an opportunity to work with other people and to hear what they see in your writing is a really wonderful thing. So you can put something out in the world and people will tell you, this is what I think it means. And that can be really cool and interesting and not at all what you thought. And so getting a little sample of that and understanding how you can impact the world is really important to me.
Other than that gained understanding, what do you hope that students take away from your classes?
Mm. I would really like students to feel comfortable, right? Developing their own voice and continuing to do that. I'd like them to understand that they can gather people around them who will support them in the arts, right? I'm really interested in that. And I want them to be able to set up a process that allows them at the same time to work on their own, right? So a lot of this can be very isolating. And there are ways like the Loft where you can figure out how to gather people around you. Maybe you keep some of those people after the class is over, but it's also something that you're going to have to do on your own. And you have to be driven, and you have to be certain. And those are things that writers aren't always capable of. So how do you set up a process that when you're not driven and you're not certain about yourself, that you keep being able to do it? So I'd really like it if we kind of experiment with voice, look at genre, whatever the class is, but also just think about, how do I make this something that I can do on my own and keep going?
Other than your own art and the teaching you've done before, what informs your classes and your teaching style?
Um, I love movies. I love to read. I love to be outside. So there's all those things, the energy I draw from where I am and what I'm currently connecting with, past teaching experiences. I would say that I'm very influenced by the teachers that were in my life, which is part of why I think I like to work with younger people as well, just because they made so much space for me to figure out who I was and took me seriously at every level, right? And so I look to those kind of early teachers to feel connected to what I'm doing.
And I think that is so true of so many writers and so many great, lovers of books, is that somewhere along the way, we had someone who handed us a book, maybe, who looked at what we were reading and validated it, sort of what you were talking about originally. And when we were speaking before this interview, you were telling me that you were a principal, and obviously, so you spent a lot of time with teenagers. How does knowing teenagers, in a sense, outside of a writing classroom, inform how you work with them in a writing classroom?
So let me see if I can do this. I will offer as well that I am a Quaker, which is a very kind of, in my opinion, a kind of a loose religion. The reason I like it is because it teaches folks to pursue the light. They say, I'm also an atheist, so it's a little complicated, but the light in every person. And so for me, especially as a principal, and I was working at a Quaker school, it mattered because you were always listening for that story. And when you're working with folks who are growing in important ways, in extraordinary ways, they get themselves into weird situations, right? And so working with teenagers and listening to who they really were and digging through the rubble or the weirdness or what they didn't understand what was going on, and just having that privilege of really understanding what someone was carrying and looking for it, and trying to be connected with it was huge for me. Anytime someone, and I feel like teaching is all about this, anytime somebody's letting you into their life as an individual, you are, they're handing you a great gift, right? It's a privilege. And so listening to those stories, trying to understand a situation that you are unfamiliar with, informs my writing, it informs my character, it makes me want to make the world a better place. So all of that to me is very much entwined. And particularly when you're dealing with high school students, I'll say for now, any window into that, any outlet they have, whether it's writing, whether it's talking to you as an educator, whatever it is, I think is really important and valuable and lasting. And so like as a principal, and a teacher, it's been huge to be able to be a part of people's lives, teachers' lives too. I mean, educators as well, right? You get this little view into everybody's humanity. That's really important to me.
Well, I love that. I love thinking about the humanity of each of our students, and I am really looking forward to your classes, both your adult and your youth classes. For our listeners out there, you can find Rachel's classes as well as our full winter spring lineup by visiting loft.org/classes. Rachel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks. I'm so glad. I'm looking forward to it, and I can't wait to meet everyone I'm going to meet. I'm excited.